A single text, 3 words sent to the wrong person. I miss you. It was meant for his son. It went to Claire Anderson, the CEO, who once fired a man for being 2 minutes late. Within seconds, her office door swung open. Every keyboard in the building went silent. She walked straight to Ethan Miller's desk, leaned close enough that only he could hear, and whispered, "Say it again." No one in that office understood what was happening, but everyone knew one satisfactory answer was all that stood between him and unemployment. 3 years, that was how long Ethan Miller had kept his head down at Whitmore and Crane Financial. 3 years of arriving early, leaving late, and never once drawing attention to himself. He was the kind of employee who did his work clean and quiet, the kind no one remembered at company events, but no one could replace on deadline week either. He liked it that way. Visibility was dangerous in a place like this. The people who got noticed were either getting promoted or getting walked out, and Ethan could not afford either kind of surprise. He was 34, raising a 6-year-old boy named Oliver on his own. His ex-wife had left when Oliver was still in diapers, packed a bag on a Sunday afternoon, and never came back for the rest. No custody fight, no dramatic goodbye, just gone. Ethan didn't talk about it at work. He didn't talk about much of anything at work. He clocked in, he performed, he clocked out, and he drove to the after-school program before it closed at 6 o'clock. That was the entire architecture of his life, and every piece of it depended on this job. Claire Anderson had been CEO for 5 years, and in that time she had rebuilt Whitmore and Crane from a mid-tier firm into one of the most aggressive players in the Northeast market. She was respected the way a surgeon is respected, not because people enjoyed being around her, but because she was precise, effective, and utterly without sentimentality. She had once terminated a senior analyst during a quarterly review for falsifying a single data point. She had fired a receptionist for clocking in 2 minutes late on 3 separate occasions. The rules at Whitmore and Crane were not suggestions. They were the architecture, and Claire was the architect. Nobody called her by her first name. Nobody lingered outside her office door. When she walked through the open floor, conversations dropped to a murmur, and keyboards got louder. She wore dark suits, kept her hair pulled back, and looked at people the way a judge looks at a courtroom, scanning for disorder. Ethan had spoken to her exactly twice in 3 years. Both times during group meetings, both times answering direct questions with short, factual responses. That was the safest distance, and he intended to keep it. It was a Thursday afternoon just past 2. Oliver had been homesick from school that day, staying with Ethan's neighbor, Mrs. Calloway, who watched him when things didn't line up. Ethan had been thinking about the boy all morning, the small cough that wouldn't go away, the tired look in his eyes when Ethan had dropped him off that morning. During a gap between tasks, he picked up his phone, opened his messages, and typed 3 words. "I miss you." He hit send without looking. The message did not go to Oliver's babysitter. It did not go to the thread he used to check in on his son. It went to the last contact he had opened that morning, a company-wide internal directory thread that had auto-dinned Claire Anderson's name at the top. He didn't realize it immediately. He set the phone down, returned to his spreadsheet, and took a sip of cold coffee. Then the phone screen lit up with a red receipt from Claire Anderson. His stomach dropped. He grabbed the phone, opened the thread, and saw it clearly. "I miss you." Sitting in a grey bubble beneath Claire Anderson's name, his fingers went cold. He tried to delete it, but the message had already been delivered and read. There was no one doing it. For 45 seconds, nothing happened. Then the glass door of Claire's corner office opened. She stepped out, not quickly, not slowly, with the kind of deliberate stride that made the entire floor go still. Heads turned, fingers froze over keyboards. No one said a word. She crossed the floor in a straight line, her eyes locked on Ethan's desk like it was the only object in the room. He stood up instinctively, the way a man stands when he knows he's already lost. She stopped less than 2 feet from him, close enough that he could smell the faint trace of black coffee on her breath. She looked at him, not with anger, not with confusion, but with something unreadable. Then she leaned in and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Say it again." Ethan's throat locked. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Claire held his gaze for another second, then straightened, turned, and walked back to her office without another word. The door closed behind her with a soft click. The floor stayed silent for what felt like a full minute. Then slowly the sounds returned. A cough, a chair rolling, a keyboard tapping. But the energy had changed. Everyone had seen it. No one had heard what she said, but they had seen the CEO of Whitmore and Crane walk across the floor, lean into a mid-level analyst's space, and whisper something that made him go pale. That image alone was enough. By the end of the day, Ethan had replayed the moment over 100 times in his head. He kept waiting for the email, the one from HR, the one that started with, "We regret to inform you all please report to the 4th floor." B. It never came. No call, no follow-up, just silence. Claire's office light stayed on behind the frosted glass until well past 7, and when Ethan finally left, the light was still on. He drove home in silence, picked up Oliver from Mrs. Calloway's, carried the boy to bed, and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at his phone. The message was still there. 3 words. "I miss you," meaned for a sick 6-year-old. Read by the most powerful woman in the building. He should have felt relief that he hadn't been fired on the spot. Instead, he felt something worse, the slow, creeping certainty that this was not over. The next morning, the whispers began. Not loud, not obvious, but present, like a draft coming through a crack no one could find. 2 women near the coffee station stopped talking the moment Ethan walked in. A guy from accounting gave him a look, half grin, half something else, at his desk. His monitor was on his files untouched, and a yellow, sticky note had been placed on his keyboard. It read, "Nice move." No name, no signature, just 2 words in handwriting he didn't recognize. Claire Anderson said nothing. She didn't look at him during the morning walkthrough. She didn't send an email. She didn't acknowledge the incident in any way. And somehow that silence was louder than anything she could have said, because in the absence of her response, everyone else filled in the blanks. Ethan could feel it, building a narrative, being written without his input, one that had nothing to do with the sick boy at home and everything to do with what people wanted to believe. He sat at his desk, staring at the sticky note, and understood the choice in front of him. He could say nothing and let the story write itself, or he could speak up and risk making everything worse. Either way, the quiet life he had built was already gone. By Monday, the sticky note was gone, but its message had album. "Ready," spread through the building like smoke through ventilation. Ethan could feel it in the way people moved around him. Ethan could feel it in the way people moved around him. A slight widening of distance, a half-second delay before someone responded to his questions. The rumor had no single shape. It shifted depending on who was telling it. In some versions, Ethan had been flirting with Claire for months. In others, she had initiated something and he had responded. A few people claimed they had seen her touch his arm. None of it was true, but the truth had become irrelevant. What mattered was the story, and the story was far more interesting than a misdirected text meant for a sick child. Mark Reynolds was the first to turn the whisper into a weapon. He sat 3 desks from Ethan, a senior associate who had been with the firm for 6 years and had been passed over for promotion twice. Mark was the kind of man who smiled when he talked and meant none of it, the type who would compliment your work in a meeting and then tell the director it was full of errors the moment you left the room. He had never liked Ethan. Not because Ethan had done anything to him, but because Ethan was quiet and competent, and that combination made Mark feel unseen. Now, with the office already buzzing, Mark had something better than dislike. He had leverage. It started small. A comment during a team lunch about how some people get ahead without doing the work. A raised eyebrow when Ethan's name appeared on a project assignment. Mark never said anything directly. He was too careful for that. But he planted seeds in conversations with just enough ambiguity to let other people draw their own conclusions. "I'm not saying anything," he told a group near the copy room one afternoon. "But have you noticed who hasn't been called into HR? Anyone else would have been gone by now." The implication was clear. Ethan was being protected. And if he was being protected, there had to be a reason. The anonymous messages started on Wednesday. The first one appeared in Ethan's internal inbox. No sender name, no subject line, just a single sentence. "Everyone knows." The second came Thursday morning, taped to the inside of the men's restroom stall on the 9th floor. "Must be nice to have connections." Ethan peeled it off the wall and threw it away, but his hands were shaking when he did. That same afternoon, he returned from a meeting to find his desk. Rearranged files moved his chair, adjusted to a different height, his personal mug pushed to the far edge. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But the message was unmistakable. Someone had been there, and they wanted him to know it. He stopped eating lunch in the break room. He started wearing headphones, even when nothing was playing, just to build a wall between himself and the murmurs he could feel but couldn't always hear. At night, he would sit in Oliver's room after the boy fell asleep and stare at the ceiling, running the numbers in his head. Rent, groceries, Oliver's school, insurance. Every calculation ended the same way. He could not afford to lose this job. Not now. Not with nothing else lined up. So he said nothing. He absorbed it. He showed up every morning with the same neutral expression and hoped the silence would eventually bore them into moving on. It didn't. On the following Tuesday, exactly 11 days after the text, an email appeared in every employer's inbox at 9:15 in the morning. The subject line read, "Mandatory all hands. Meeting 200 p.m. today." The sender was Claire Anderson. No preview text, no context, just the time and the location. The main conference room on the 12th floor, the one with the glass walls and the long mahogany table that only came out for quarterly reviews and terminations. Ethan read the email 3 times. His mouth went dry. He had seen this before. The company-wide meeting with no agenda. The short notice, the formal tone. The last time it happened, 2 department heads were let go in front of everyone. He was certain this was it. Claire was going to make an example out of him, publicly, cleanly, the way she always did. The hours between 9:15 and 2 o'clock moved like cement. Ethan couldn't focus. He opened a spreadsheet and stared at numbers that blurred into nothing. He thought about Oliver, about who would pick him up from school. If Ethan was still sitting in an HR office at 6 o'clock, he thought about calling Mrs. Calloway to ask if she could stay late, but that would mean admitting something was wrong, and he wasn't ready to do that. So he sat and he waited, and he watched the clock the way a man watches a fuse burn down. At 1:55, the 12th floor conference room was full, every seat taken, every wall lined with employees standing shoulder to shoulder. The energy was tight, electric, the kind that fills a room when people know something is about to happen. But no one knows what. Ethan stood near the back, close to the door, his arms at his sides. He had already decided that if Claire called his name, he would not argue. He would walk out quietly. He would not give them anything else to talk about. Claire entered at exactly 2 o'clock. She wore a black blazer and no jewelry. She didn't carry notes. She stood at the front of the room, scanned the crowd once from left to right, and began speaking in a voice that carried without effort. "I'll keep this short," she said. "It has come to my attention that a personal misunderstanding involving a member of this company has been distorted into a workplace rumor. I'm not going to name anyone, and I'm not going to repeat the rumor, because doing so would give it a legitimacy it does not deserve." The room was completely still. Ethan felt his pulse in his temples. Claire continued without shifting. Gee, her gaze. "What I will say is this. Anyone, and I mean anyone, who is found to be spreading unverified personal information about a colleague, whether through internal communication, written messages, or verbal gossip, will have their employment terminated immediately. No warning, no review, no second conversation." She let the weight of it settle across the room. "This company was built on performance, not speculation. If you have time to gossip, you don't have enough work. That will be corrected." She turned and walked out. The meeting lasted less than 3 minutes. Ethan didn't move. He stood by the door as the room slowly emptied around him, people filing out in tight silence, their faces carefully blank. No one looked at him directly. That was how he knew they all knew the meeting was about him. Claire hadn't said his name, but she hadn't needed to. And while the speech should have felt like protection, it didn't. It felt like a spotlight. He had gone from being the subject of a rumor to being the man the CEO had publicly defended. And in a place like Whitmore and Crane, being defended by Claire Anderson was almost as dangerous as being attacked by her. The gossip didn't stop. It just went underground. People stopped talking in hallways and started talking in parking garages, in private group chats and bars. After work, the tone shifted to less curiosity, more resentment. Before the meeting, Ethan had been a target of speculation. After it, he was a target of envy. The prevailing theory now was not that Ethan and Claire were involved, but that Ethan had somehow gained untouchable status, and that was worse. In a competitive firm where people clawed for every advantage, the perception of unfair protection was poison. Mark Reynolds adjusted his strategy accordingly. He stopped making comments in hallways and started making them in meetings. During a project review, the following week, Ethan presented a client analysis he had spent 3 days preparing. Mark interrupted halfway through. "I think there's a formatting issue on slide 7, he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "And the projections on page 12 don't match the source data. Did anyone check this before it went up?" The formatting issue was a font inconsistency. The projection discrepancy was a rounding difference of less than 0.5%. Both were negligible, but Mark's tone suggested incompetence, and the room absorbed it. Ethan responded. He shouldn't have, but he did. "The data is accurate," he said, his voice tight. "If you look at the source table, the rounding follows standard." Mark cut him off with a wave of his hand. "I'm just saying we should be careful. Accuracy matters here." The meeting moved on, but the damage was already logged. 2 days later, Ethan received an email from his direct supervisor. "Just a heads up. A few people have flagged concerns about your demeanor in recent meetings. Might be worth keeping things calm and professional." The word unprofessional wasn't used. It didn't have to be. Then came the performance review. It had originally been scheduled for the end of the quarter, still 6 weeks away. On a Friday afternoon, Ethan received a calendar invite, moving it up to the following Wednesday. The invite came from HR, not from his direct supervisor. There was no explanation, no context, just a time, a room number, and a single line, performance and conduct review. He stared at the screen for a long time. He knew what an accelerated review meant. It meant someone had flagged him. It meant there was a file being built, and this meeting was the final step before a decision was made. He had seen it happen to others. First the whispers, then the documentation, then the meeting, then the box on the desk. That night, he sat on the floor of Oliver's bedroom while the boy slept. The nightlight cast a pale blue glow across the walls, and Ethan could hear the soft rhythm of his son's breathing. He thought about what it would mean to lose this job. Not just the money, but the structure, the stability, the ability to look his son in the eye and say everything was fine. Oliver had already lost one parent. The idea of failing him in a different way of coming home one day and not being able to provide was the one thing Ethan could not absorb. Wednesday came. The review was held in a small glass-walled office on the 14th floor. Claire Anderson was already seated when Ethan walked in. No HR representative, no supervisor, just Claire, a closed laptop, and a single folder on the table. She gestured to the chair across from her. Ethan sat down. The room smelled like printer toner and cold air. Claire opened the folder, glanced at something inside, and then looked up at him. Her expression was neutral, the same controlled blankness she wore in every meeting, every hallway, every public moment. "Ethan," she said, "there have been concerns raised about the way you've handled the situation over the past few weeks." His stomach folded in on itself. He felt the edges of the chair press into his palms. She continued, her tone even. "Your supervisor has noted increased tension in meetings. Several colleagues have described your behavior as reactive, and there's a general sense that the disruption hasn't been managed well on your end." Ethan sat still. He didn't interrupt. He didn't defend himself. He just listened. And with every sentence, the walls of the room seemed to close in another inch. This was it. 3 years of clean work, early mornings, and quiet competence, all reduced to a single text message, and the chaos it had unleashed. He had no leverage, no allies in the room, no argument that could undo what had already been decided in conversations he was never invited to. All he had was a sick boy at home and a job that was slipping through his fingers, one word at a time. The silence in the room pressed down like a physical weight. Ethan sat across from Claire in that glass-walled office on the 14th floor. Her words still hanging between them. Concerns, tension, reactive disruption. Every one of them landed like a small, precise incision. He could feel the end coming. He had rehearsed this moment in his head a dozen times over the past week, and in every version it ended the same way. A handshake, a cardboard box, and a drive home he wasn't ready to make. Then Claire closed the folder. She placed both hands flat on the table and looked at him. Not the way she looked at employees during reviews, not the measured scan of a CEO evaluating a liability, but something different, something closer to direct. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need an honest answer." Ethan nodded. His throat was tight, but he kept his eyes on hers. Claire's voice dropped half a register. "The text message, the one you sent me, who was it meant for?" There it was, the question he had been waiting for since that Thursday afternoon, since the moment he saw the red receipt and felt his entire body go cold. He had imagined a dozen ways to answer it, a professional explanation, a careful apology, a deflection wrapped in corporate language. But sitting in that room with the hum of the building around him and the pale light coming through the glass, none of those versions felt right. They all felt like armor, and he was too tired to wear it. "My son," Ethan said. His voice came out quieter than he intended, but it was steady. "His name is Oliver. He's 6. He was homesick that day. Fever, bad cough, the kind of thing that makes you feel useless because you can't be there. I texted him the way I always do when I'm stuck here, and he's stuck. At home. 3 words. I didn't check the name. I just sent it." He swallowed and continued before she could respond. "I'm not going to dress it up. I wasn't trying to be inappropriate. I wasn't trying to get anyone's attention. I was sitting at my desk thinking about my kid, and I made a mistake. That's the whole story." Claire didn't react immediately. She sat still, her expression unchanged, and Ethan braced for whatever came next. He had given her the truth, unpolished, unstrategic, and completely useless as a defense. If she had already made her decision, but it was all he had. He wasn't going to invent a better version of events just to survive a meeting. If this job was going to end, it would end with the truth on the table. When Claire finally spoke, her tone had shifted. The formal edge was gone, replaced by something quieter, more deliberate, like someone choosing their words not for effect, but for accuracy. "I know what it's like," she said, "to have people in this building decide who you are before you've said a word." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The sentence carried its own weight, and Ethan understood that she wasn't offering sympathy. She was offering recognition, the kind that comes from someone who has stood in a similar silence and chosen not to explain herself either. Claire opened the laptop beside her and turned the screen toward him. On it was his employee file, 3 years of reviews, project records, attendance logs, and performance scores. Every metric was clean. Every evaluation was above average. Not a single disciplinary note before the past 2 weeks. "This is your record," she said. 3 years of consistent, reliable work. And in the span of 11 days, a rumor nearly erased all of it. She closed the laptop. "Your position is not in jeopardy. It never was. This meeting was not called to terminate you. It was called because I needed to hear the truth from you directly before I made my next move." Ethan felt something shift behind his ribs. Not relief exactly, but the sudden absence of a pressure that had been building for days. He didn't speak. He didn't trust himself to say the right thing in that moment. So he just sat and let the words settle. Claire stood and walked to the window. The city stretched out below them in grey and silver traffic, moving in slow threads between the buildings. "I've been running this company for 5 years, she said without turning around. "In that time, I've built a culture around discipline and precision. Those things matter, but somewhere along the way, discipline became fear and precision became silence. People in this building don't talk to each other. They talk about each other, and I allowed that to happen because it was easier to manage a quiet flaw than an honest one." She turned back to face him. "That changes today." Within the hour, a company-wide memo went out under Claire's signature. It was 4 paragraphs long and left no room for interpretation. Effective immediately, Whitmore and Crane was implementing a formal workplace conduct policy targeting harassment, rumor spreading, and targeted personal attacks. All complaints would be reviewed by an independent HR panel. Any employee found to have participated in the coordinated spread of false information about a colleague would face immediate disciplinary action, up to and including termination. The memo did not reference Ethan by name. It didn't need to. The effect was immediate. By the end of the day, the anonymous messages stopped. The rearranged desk items stopped. The side conversations that went quiet whenever Ethan walked past those stopped too. Not because the people involved had changed their minds, but because Claire Anderson had made the cost clear, and no one at Whitmore and Crane was willing to test her on it. Mark Reynolds was the last to adjust. He sat at his desk that afternoon, reading the memo with the same half-smile he wore in every meeting. The one that looked like confidence, but was really calculation. He didn't post anything. He didn't make a comment. He simply went quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from reflection, but from self-preservation. Within 2 weeks, Mark requested a transfer to the firm's satellite office in Philadelphia. No one asked why. No one needed to. The days that followed were not dramatic. There was no public apology, no grand gesture, no company-wide acknowledgement of what Ethan had endured. The office simply returned to its normal rhythm. Keyboards, coffee deadlines, meetings that ran long, and emails that came too late. But something underneath had shifted. People greeted Ethan in the hallway again. His supervisor sent him a message saying his quarterly review would return to its originally scheduled date. A woman from the legal department he had never spoken to stopped by his desk one morning and said, "For what it's worth, I thought the whole thing was unfair." Then she walked away before he could respond. Ethan didn't try to make sense of all of it. He didn't need the story to have a neat ending or a clear moral. He just needed to get through the day, pick up Oliver by 6, and keep the architecture of his life intact. And for the first time in weeks, that felt possible again. On a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the text that had started everything, Ethan sat in the parking lot of Oliver's after-school program. The boy climbed into the back seat with his backpack half unzipped and a crayon drawing crumpled in one hand. "Dad, look," Oliver said, holding up the drawing. It was a picture of 2 stick figures, one tall one, small, standing in front of a square house with a triangle roof. The tall one had a briefcase. The small one had a cape. "That's us," Oliver said. "You go to work, and I fight bad guys." Ethan looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone, opened his messages, and typed 2 words, "Love you." He checked the name. He checked it again. Then he hit send. The message went to Oliver's babysitter thread, the right one this time. He put the phone in his pocket, started the car, and drove home. He never stopped sending those messages. Every day, sometime between lunch and the afternoon stretch, he would pick up his phone, open the thread, and type something small. "Love you, thinking about you, can't wait to get home." He never rushed it. He always checked the name, but he never hesitated either, because the thing he had learned in those 3 weeks was not that mistakes are dangerous. He already knew that. What he learned was simpler and harder to forget. Reputation can crack under pressure. Gossip can break what took years to build. But the things that actually hold a life together, honesty, steadiness, the quiet love between a father and his son, those don't bend to office politics. They don't disappear when someone writes your name on a sticky note or whispers about you near the copy room. They stay. And in the end, they are the only things that